Now, on being accepted, the Women's Land Army, although it was a civilian organization, it was a uniformed organization. And have a rather splendid lady here. This wonderful lady, I'm afraid she's no longer with us. This is a lady called Edith Sharples. And she was a character in herself, a wit and a raconteur. I just wish that you could have had her instead of me sitting here. Now, she would have given you a far greater insight than I'm able to. But Edith was very, very proud of her uniform. One of the things that she sheds a very interesting light on is the way that the girls who came forward for the Women's Land Army were really made to feel, yes, we are becoming part of something. It is an important service. We are doing important work. The uniform that they were equipped with was very, very practical, very functional. We see here the smart uniform, the overcoat, the armband, socks, shoes, jodhpur trousers, Airtex t-shirts, and woolen jumpers. You were also issued with bib and brace overalls, and with Wellingtons when they were available. And you either had the soft cap there, or some girls were issued with a beret. And it was a smart uniform. And they took pride in their uniform. And in fact, they were required to take part in take pride in their uniform, because although it was a civilian organization, it was still a very disciplined organization. Now, one of the problems that we have with operating this kind of central labour pool service is that agriculture is actually an incredibly varied industry. Some girls on joining found that they were actually sent off to receive special training, and they went to a training school, and local training centres were set up and down the country. And it varied between a couple of days to a week of instruction in the general practice of agriculture. But the general practice of agriculture is very, very vague indeed. So a lot of the girls found themselves pretty much in at the deep end when they were assigned to particular jobs. Because you could find yourself, again, as we say, serving a long way from home in a landscape that you're not necessarily familiar with, on tasks that may be completely new to you. Let's just think about the background of the girls. 2/3 of the volunteers for the Women's Land Army were girls from a countryside background already, so they were coming from farming families. But 1/3 of the volunteers came from cities, towns, and had had very little contact with agriculture previously. They came for all kinds of reasons. For many of them, it was a chance to get away, a chance to go and do something important, to make a contribution, to take what was seen in some cases, and you'll hear this in the video, take what was seen as being a preferred option, you know, get out on the land, get away from the towns and cities. Remember, something like 3 million children had been evacuated from the towns and cities. The threat of the air raid and the Blitz was seen as being very, very, it was a very real threat. So this was seen by a lot of families as being, you know, this is a good thing for the girls to be doing. I don't have daughters, I have sons, but I certainly would be steering, you know, daughters of mine towards looking at this as an option. So having joined, received a little bit of basic training, knowing that you could be sent anywhere, what kind of work did the girls then get involved in? Well, once again, we had the two main branches, the Land Army proper and the Women's Timber Corps. The Women's Timber Corps was, I feel, by very much the harder of the branches, because the girls found themselves working there under incredibly difficult circumstances, a very dangerous job indeed. The land girls could find themselves going up and down the country and getting involved in any kind of work. And experience of the girls was very, very varied indeed. To pick on one particular branch, a number of girls who were seen as having a particular aptitude for mechanical jobs were sent for special training by a company not very far away from where I'm now, based over in Hull, or just this side of Hull, a company called Priestman's, and they specialized in land drainage equipment. Now, at the start of the war, it was identified that something like over 5 million acres of farmland was not in production because of poor drainage. So a lot of effort was put in very quickly into draining a lot of this land very, very quickly, and that played quite an ongoing contribution throughout the war. And a number of girls were sent to train with Priestman's. And Priestman's themselves developed a dredging machine called the Cub, which was a smaller and lighter weight dredging machine, which was specifically developed for the land girls themselves. Very, very interesting product. And a number of girls worked throughout the war, specializing in land drainage, and that's going to be a tough job. Other girls found themselves either joining a team of land girls who lived and worked, were billeted together in hostels, and again acting as a labour pool for local farms there, moving around from farm to farm pretty much as a team. And some girls found themselves billeted directly on farms, in some cases quite a long way away from the centres of population. And it was for those girls in particular that I feel, because they had hard jobs, they were cut off to some extent from the society, the camaraderie of hostel life. And farmers were not always as welcoming as they could have been. This is something that you come back to time and time again in the literature, the reports of the time, where regional organisers are going around exercising their pastoral responsibility for the girls. You get reports saying, oh, this girl's feeling very, very lonely. She was very down in her spirits, feeling isolated, missing home. Again, you know, we're recognizing there in collecting these stories that there is pastoral responsibility for girls was seen as being a very, very important one as well. Just another facet of this very important and very well organized unit that the Land Army was becoming. Now, recruitment was ongoing. We see here, I believe this is a recruitment parade in Scarborough. Bonnet and Sons is a shop in Scarborough there. The land girls here you see in the smart parade dress, once again, marching through the town. This is publicity. This is attracting people, saying, you know, come on, volunteer for us. And when conscription came in, I think it was either 1941 or 1942, I think it was 41. For young women, joining the Women's Land Army was one of the options which they could take under the Conscription Act. And you see smart, independent women marching through a town. You know, that's something that's saying, yes, we are here. And I want again to just emphasize this role. This is the girls saying, yes, here we are here, we exist, look at us, we mean business. And they mean business there. Now, I like this photograph here. This is showing us another very important aspect of Land Army operation. What's happening here is that at a formal parade, the girls are being issued with their service, good conduct, and special training qualifications. There was a progression through the Land Army ranks. You could earn proficiency badges, proficiency training, and as you went through your service, you achieved and were awarded service recognition. Again, this is an organization which takes itself seriously and says, look at us, we are very, very professional. The Queen took an interest in the work of the Land Girls and helped to raise the profile of the organization. Again, demonstrating, these are press photographs which were appearing at the time, demonstrating the work and the circumstances under which girls could find themselves operating. Now, we've just got a little series of photographs here which were collected by my friend Edith here. My late friend Edith. Collection of photographs which she came up with. Here we see girls ditching, working on drainage. Preparing cows for milking. Now, a lot of girls found themselves working in the dairy industry, and dairy output increased very, very rapidly. And by the end of the war, dairy output had increased by something like 60%, measured in terms of milk and butter and cheese production. And Vita Sackville-West, who wrote a very interesting study of the Land Girls, felt that it was in this area that the Land Girls proved themselves to be most effective and most productive, and that this was the most important work in which they were occupied. Edith worked for most of her time as a dairy girl. These are just some of her collections showing the very, very labor intensive. This is a cooling and straining process. I'm pointing at the screen. You can't see me pointing at the screen, of course. The milk cooling going on here. Now I'm going to just break away from the PowerPoint at this point. This is an interesting thing here. Although mechanization was appearing and tractors were appearing on the land, and were in fact a well-established thing, a lot of work was still done with horsepower, and a lot of work was still done very, very manually and slowly. Here we see somebody rigging up horse ploughing. So it was still a very labor-intensive process. Now let me see if I can just get myself back to stop sharing. How do I do that? Apologies here. Good time to put the cap on. I do apologize here. This is my ineptitude. Have you still got the PowerPoints?
Yep.
Right.
You're back.
Good. Excellent. Right. Yes, apologies for that. I want to just talk for a minute about what, from my perspective, is possibly the greatest contribution that the Land Girls made. From my views, one of the things that the Land Girls actually really did was to establish themselves as being present on farms by right. Remember, there'd always been women working on farms, always had been. In this case, the Land Girls were present on farms, not as farmer's wife, daughter, sister, or whatever. They were there in their own right as workers. It was creating this new identity almost. Now, there was some resistance against the Women's Land Army. A lot of farmers were very uncertain. You get things like farmers saying, well, you know, I've lost so many good men and all they're sending me is a girl. A lot of farmers' wives also were rather dubious about having these young ladies working very closely with their sons, husbands, and what have you. And there was a general resistance, a general belief that women could not do men's work. That was the way things were. It was reflected to some extent in the pay. And just going back to how the Women's Land Army actually operated, although you were a recruit for the Women's Land Army, you were not paid by the Women's Land Army. Once a land girl was recruited, they were then placed in a labour pool, and farmers would recruit from that labour pool, and it was actually the individual farmers who were responsible for paying the wages of the land girls. Now, that did cause some problems in itself, and a fair proportion of organisers, county organisers' time was spent very often chasing up backlogs of wages. Now, the typical working week for a land girl was fixed at being 47 hours. But in summer, that could rise to anything in excess of 60 hours at harvest time, of course. And the pay that they received was fixed as being 2/3 of an equivalent man's wage. And that was done on the very scientific basis of somebody said, well, it takes about 3 women to do 2 men's work. So there you go. That was the science behind that. However, it wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The women were there earning money in their own name for the work that they were doing, and they were creating this new role. So it's once again just pushing those doors open just a little. There was a great social feeling also amongst the girls. You could be finding yourself working with women from all over the country. And for a long time after the war, reunions were held on a regular basis. So this spirit carried through. And the girls are frequently referred to themselves taking things away from that time, taking things away from their experience, taking it back to their ordinary lives. A lot of girls actually chose to stay on farms and to make careers in the countryside. But all of them have always said, yes, I took something away, I gained from this. Now, I'm going to do another screen share now. And all being well, what you'll see is a little video called Feeding the Nation. We use this with children that visit our museum, and it's on general play to all visitors to our museum. It was put together a few years ago now, and sadly some of the ladies that you'll hear are no longer with us. But it gives a real voice to the experience of the land girls in a far more effective way than I can. We should start with you hearing some music.
Yep, it's working.
Something on the radio. Well, they didn't call it the radio, did the wireless, about the war. And we were all there ready, and we all stood round listening. And when Mr. Chamberlain started to speak, Grandma, I was crying and my mother was crying. And I thought, well, it won't affect us. But of course, sadly, it did affect all of us. Yes. Knew there'd been some raids because from the cottage, if we stood on the wall of the cottage, we could see London burning. That's how far away we were. And you could see this red glow, and then you'd see the black smoke. And we thought, oh, we'll go and have a look. And we got on to King's Cross Station, and this big burly red cap came to us and said, and what are you two girls going to do? Well, we said we'd come for the day, maybe go to Regent's Park and have a look down the main road, Oxford Street. Oh no, he says, you're not. He says, you're going to get back on the next train. He says, because there's been so much bombing, we want as little traffic as possible. And he said, if you aren't here for a purpose, we'd like you to go back. And he says, and I mean on the next train. So we walked round the station and back on the next train. That cost us 1 and 9pence. We did do in the end. We did get to go in and have a look around. But the devastation and the smell of burning wood and burning plaster. It was an awful smell.
When I was 17 and a half, they were all disappearing. And I thought, oh, I want to go, where they're going, something new, all this excitement. Because for the young people, it wasn't such a worry as it was for your parents. So when I saw them all going and coming back in the uniforms, then my father said, when you're 19, you're going to have to go. You'd be conscripted like men. All the ladies were called up as well. I didn't realise that. Oh, so I said, what will I do? So I said, they might put in munitions, they might do anything. I was horrified. So when I was 17 off, I volunteered for the Land Army because I felt I would cope with that. Other things I wouldn't cope with so well. So that's how I did it. And for 6 months, I didn't know whether I was going to cope with it. It was harder work than I thought, as my dad said. But he said, at least you'll be safe in the country.
I wanted to go in the forces. I wanted to go in the ATS. Mum wouldn't hear of it. No, you're not. She said, you're not going into any of those forces, she said. So I said, well, can I go in the Land Army? So yes, I could go in the Land Army. So another friend and I, came to York and had the interview and everything, and got word that I was going to Bedford. Well, Bedford, it seemed like going abroad to the farthest country that you could go because you never travelled.
I don't want to join the Air Force, I'll have to fly in a plane. This is years ago, I do it now. No, I don't want to fly in a plane. I don't want to go in the army, they'll send me abroad and shoot at me. As if they wouldn't shoot at me in a plane, but that's beside the point. I'd like to go in the Land Army. I'd seen the Land Army girls at work. I knew the job, I knew what they were doing. I thought it'd be a doddle. Big laugh. No doddle. But I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, but it was hard work. Because we did hard, cold work, all weathers. The uniforms were good, but they didn't cover everything. You didn't get waterproofs like you would have done today. You got the jodhpurs and you got the nice thick green jumper. And the hat wasn't much use, the big hat. I used to tie a scarf on back to front. The girls at the factories used to tie them on like a turban. We used to tie them on like this at the back, then clap the hat on top. We got shoes and boots, and they had to last a certain time, and you had to trade them in. And if you were a bit heavy on them, you got a bit grumbled at, but you couldn't help that. I mean, you would, welly boots used to get stuck in mud, and you'd be stood there trying to pull your leg out of this mud. We used to have the bib and brace overalls for summer. We got the long stockings that came over your jodhpurs and went under your wellies, and that your legs and your feet were warm. Well, you weren't really cold. The gear you had was warm. It was the waterproof you didn't get. And we used to sit on the tractors with a sack over our knees and a sack over our shoulders to take the worst of the rain, because the potato sacks, funnily enough, if they got wet and you shook them, the dampness sort of went through, and you could keep them on your knee and lose some of the wet. And you could do the same with them over your shoulders. So if you could get hold of a couple of potato sacks and put them in the tractor shed where they keep dry, that was your waterproofing. Oh, we pulled turnips and we carried them in great big scuttles to the animals they really were heavy. We used to take them in the carts down to the farm with the horse and cart. The tractor was only used for ploughing and certain jobs that it was quicker at than the horse. The hard work was winter. Summer was hard work, but it was different. Summer, when you were making hay, turning the hay, piling it up, stacking it and all that, that was fine. You worked long hours and you were tired at the end of the day, but you were dry 9 times out of 10, and you had fun with your friends. But in winter, when it was wet and cold and you were doing all the pulling the food up for the animals, like we pulled up turnips and we did sugar beet and chopped the tops off for the sheep to go and eat and all that, and you're out in the cold and the wet with a sack over your shoulder, your hands are frozen, your feet are frozen. But what do? It had to be done, and people had to be fed.
Oh yes, I grew up in a lot of ways, and I learned a lot more than I ever learned at school. And I think the war made us grow up as well. We learned that when somebody in authority said, "You will do it," you did it. And you did do as you're told in the wartime. And I think it stops with you.
When you think of it as an overall thing, we did a damn good job. We were needed, and we didn't get a lot of thanks for it. There wasn't a lot of recognition. I know there is now, but there wasn't at the time for the girls. When you think of some of the jobs that they took on,